Hey, it's Ashley from Westcott, and in today's video I want to walk you through how I use lighting to sculpt a scene in studio to create a warm, moody image. The setup was inspired by some props I had left over from a previous shoot, specifically a few ladders I didn't want to go to waste, but this time I wanted to use them in a completely different way that I haven't done before. I was aiming for something that felt kind of like an old painter's studio or an attic with a lot of warm tones and a lot of cozy textures and dramatic light. So let's break it down. I started by setting up the backdrop, and for this look I used Westcott's 8x8 warm painterly backdrop, and I mounted this to the X-Drop Pro frame. It has these rich, warm tones, which were exactly what I was going for, and I thought it would pair nicely with the wardrobe I had for the shoot. Since we were using this deep maroon dress, and the warm backdrop really brought out the tones and made everything feel cohesive. I then added a second backdrop, an 8x8 parchment paper backdrop, but this time I placed it on the floor. I wasn't really planning to shoot wide enough to actually show the floor, but I wanted it there just in case, so I had that option. The plain white floor of the studio just didn't have the right feel or the look for what I was going for. The parchment paper backdrop added a nice texture and warmth to the scene, and honestly I liked the fact that it would get wrinkled, kind of like an old painter's drop cloth. With that being said, if you're doing a shoot and you don't want those wrinkles showing up, I recommend adding some sandbags to the corner just to keep everything tight and stretched out. For my key light, I went with an FJ400 version 2 and modified it with a 7-foot umbrella with a diffusion. I wanted a really soft broad light source, something that would fill the entire space and not just spotlight the model. This gave me that beautiful soft wrap of light and kept everything looking clean and natural. I placed the light off to the side and feathered it across the scene to give it a more soft, natural window light look. I also kept it at a relatively low height, just enough to keep the shadows looking natural without getting too dramatic. Keeping the light lowered also helped evenly light my model from head to toe, which was important since she had plenty of room to move around and interact with the props. I didn't want her to feel locked into one pose, so this setup gave her a bit more freedom when keeping the lighting consistent. Positioning the light to the side also added some nice shadow fall off to the far side of my model's face, which really helped add some depth and dimension to the image. It's a small shift, but the angle helped make the whole set feel a little bit more sculpted and natural. Now, one thing to keep in mind, even with a large modifier like the 7-foot umbrella, you still want to be conscious of where your modifier is. If your model is going from standing to sitting, you're still going to want to adjust the height of your light. So in the shoot, my model went from sitting on a stool to standing on ladders, which creates a pretty big change in the height. To keep the light looking natural and hitting her at just the right angle, I had to raise or lower the light, depending on her position. At one point, based on how the model was positioned on the ladder, I realized the light would actually be more flattering coming from the opposite direction. Now I had two choices here. I could either change the whole entire set, or I could just simply move my lights. So I moved the lights around and swapped my main light to the other side, and I also moved my fill light, which we'll get to in a minute. This was a quick fix that made a big difference, and this is where having battery-powered lights really help. I was able to quickly move my lights around without having to worry about cords or unplugging anything, to simply move the light over. So let's talk about the next light. Since the scene was styled to look like an attic and we had that really soft light coming in to mimic a window, I thought why not push it further and actually add a window shape to the background. So I brought in another FJ400 version 2 and paired it with an optical spot with a 50mm lens. Then I used the prairie window gobo and projected a window pattern onto the backdrop. I wanted the window to be pretty noticeable, so I made sure to keep the lens in sharp focus. That way the window pattern is nice and crisp and becomes a strong visual element in the shot without distracting from the model. I played with the position a little bit and even let some of the ladders cast their shadows onto the gobo projection. That way it kind of broke up the window just a little bit. This helps break up the light from the gobo and add a little bit more texture to the backdrop to make it look a little bit more realistic. And it's a simple trick that really sells the idea of the space and the depth. To finish it off, I wanted to bring a little bit more creativity and add some color into the scene by adding some gelled lighting. So I grabbed a third FJ400 and used a blue gel from the Westcott's Vivid FlexiGel pack and placed it directly on the dome of the light. Since I wanted the color to be subtle and spread evenly, I modified the light with a 45-inch shoot-through umbrella. This gave me a broad diffused light source that would gently fill in the shadows without overpowering the main light. Just enough to add a cool blue tone and create some nice color contrast. It's subtle, but that is the point. The backdrop, the props, and the wardrobe were already filled with warm tones, so adding just a touch of cool blue to the shadows really helped balance the image and make everything pop. Blue and orange are actually opposite on the color wheel, so by bringing those two tones together I get a really nice color contrast, while still keeping the overall lighting soft and cohesive. I think what I love most about this shoot is how a few simple props, a couple of backdrops, and some intentional lighting can completely transform a space. You don't need a huge set or a bunch of gear to tell a story. Just a little bit of creativity and control over your light goes a long way.